Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the RFUMS, a pioneer in medicine presentation, excuse me. My name is Monica Branch, and I serve as the president of the Student National Medical Association. And on behalf of the university, we're very excited to kick off our Black History celebration here on campus. And I have the pleasure of introducing our distinguished guest, Dr. Alexa Kennedy. Now, she is very accomplished, and she has a lot of great things about her, so I'm going to read. Okay. So Dr. Kennedy is a medical doctor specializing in pediatric neurosurgery, and her area of expertise includes spinal abnormalities, congenital spinal abnormalities, hydrocephalus, and then also trauma and brain tumors. Dr. Kennedy is respectively noted as the first African-American woman to become a neurosurgeon, and she's also the first African-American board-certified neurosurgeon. She received her medical degree from the University of Michigan with cum laude honors. She completed a surgery internship at Yale New Haven Hospital, and then she completed her neurosurgery residency at the University of Minnesota, and her pediatric neurosurgery fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. During her tenure as a pediatric neurosurgery, Dr. Kennedy held numerous teaching positions, including full professor of neurosurgery and the Peter Skotenis Professor of Neurosurgery at Wayne State University. And she also held a professor appointment at Florida State University. She has also held numerous administrative positions, including Chief of Neurosurgery and Acting Chairman in the Department of Neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital of Michigan. She is a recipient of multiple honorary degrees and has held many national positions in the field of neurosurgery. She is also the recipient of the American Medical Women's Association President's Award. She's a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is a not-for-profit, internationally recognized Greek letter organization of college-educated women who are dedicated to public service. And an interesting note about her organization is that her mother is a former national president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Kennedy's courageous career as a pediatric physician, a medical educator, and a community leader is an inspiration to new generations who push the boundaries of modern medicine. With over 20 years of experience, over 100 publications, and over 50 presentations to date, Dr. Kennedy brings a wealth of knowledge regarding pediatric neurosurgery. And she has helped thousands of children with life-threatening illnesses. Dr. Kennedy is truly a medical pioneer, and we are very excited to receive her lecture today. Her lecture is entitled "The Path is Never Linear." Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Alexa Kennedy.
I think it's afternoon, so I'll say good afternoon. My Florida friends couldn't believe I was coming to Chicago in February, but I said they were just wimps. I lived in Minneapolis for 5 years. I haven't been cold since I left there. Ms. Henderson and Dr. Olivier smoothed all of the logistics, and here I appear. But then there was a surprise. My first job out of fellowship as a pediatric neurosurgeon was at Henry Ford Hospital, and Dr. Welch was chief of neurology there, so I found out that he was the chief here. And so we had a very pleasant opportunity to reminisce and tell great war stories last night. But actually, I'm here to talk to you, so I'm going to get on with that. A number of questions got sent to me, so it became clear you wanted to know my story. So I'm going to tell you my story at least as much as I can remember. I'm a child of the Midwest, and I grew up in Lansing, Michigan. I was one of 4 children, the only girl. It's always nice to be the only something. My brothers still think that I was favored. I played it to the hilt. My brothers are all lawyers, my youngest brother explaining that he looked at how Joe looked, my oldest brother, and looked at how I lived, and decided that Joe lived better, and so he was going to become a lawyer too. My father was a dentist, and my mother was took care of children when she were young, and my father was an old school man, so he didn't want her to make money. So she could do anything she wanted as long as she didn't make money. So she did everything. She was on the United Negro College Fund. She was on the Community Chess Board. She ultimately was on the national board of the YMCA and moved up to being on several bank boards as well as being president of Delta, which she already mentioned. So she had a very distinguished career, but she didn't make any money until the very end when she ran the foundation for the community college and was the first one to raise over $1 million for the local community college. My maternal grandmother was a professor at Lane College, a historical black college in Jackson, Tennessee. And my grandfather finished pharmacy school, for the pharmacists among you, in 1921 at Meharry. So I came from a family where education was not encouraged. It was expected. When we first went to kindergarten, we were given an alarm clock, and we were expected to get ourselves up and ready for school. It always seemed funny to my friends that I had that responsibility at that age, but if you think about it, it really is very good real-world preparation. In our family, the idea was my job was to go to school, and I had to learn how to get up, get dressed, and get there every day. And the reason I had to do that was because the person who would benefit from me going to school was me, and not my parents. So it's an important mindset to establish in a child in terms of what the expectations are and who is expected to be responsible for those jobs. At the end of kindergarten, my family moved from the black neighborhood, it was very highly segregated, this was still the 50s, to an area where we were able to build a new home on land that was sold to blacks because the county wouldn't allow the owner to build a gas station on it. As a result, my brother and I became the only black students in a rural school district, which was interesting. We had some issues, some name calling, which didn't bother me much. I was a first, second grader. I wasn't really that concerned about it. But unknown to me at the time, I learned only much later that it was discovered during those years that my second grade teacher had lied about my standardized test scores and assigned them to a white student. Through a fairly complicated process, it was ultimately discovered. She was fired, and because my scores were so good, I got to go to the 4th grade from the 2nd grade. Learning in the process that the only thing you really learn in 3rd grade is multiplication tables, which my mother taught me in the summer. The drama abated. And I did make a friend who, as I was thinking back on it, Steve Waterbury was my friend in 4th grade, who remains my friend today over 50 years later. The remainder of my local education was unmarred by any more drama. I was, however, an excellent student and worked very hard at it, and I was fairly competitive. My hometown was small, and I was interested in being a mathematician. Who knows why? But mathematics always came easy to me, and I enjoyed the logic of it. And so I was very concerned, and I kind of laughed, because at lunch today, some of the other students were concerned and worried. And I was worried that the students from Detroit had calculus in high school, because it was offered in the good schools in Detroit, and we couldn't get calculus. And so I managed to convince my school and my mother to let me take Algebra 2 as an independent study, so that I could complete the high school curriculum at the end of my junior year. And then we convinced them, my friend Tom McKenna and I, to let us take calculus as part of our high school course at the community college. It's interesting, this is very commonly done now. But in those days it was unheard of, and we were the first ones in our community to do it. So there were a few nice benefits to that. One, Tom McKenna's mother taught at our school, and so she had a car there. And two, the calculus class was only offered at night. So Tom and I had free afternoons and with a car, so we had a lot of fun, and we became great friends. And Tom ultimately went on to MIT and became a neurophysiologist. And he was my buddy for all the fun stuff we wanted to do that other people thought was weird. Like he and I would go out to Michigan State and take a Fortran course at kind of what computing was at in those days. Anybody here remember Fortran? How many punch cards did you make? Before we had real computers, you used to have to make punch cards to run through the computers. So I think the theme there is, for me, that I had two friends who were also interested in interesting things and interested in trying new things. And I think it's very important to surround yourself with people who are willing to push themselves, So that it's much easier to go take a Fortran course if your buddy goes with you than if you have to go out there and take it by yourself. I probably never would have by myself. I went on to the University of Michigan, not surprisingly, as a math major. And I also participated in Michigan debate, which unfortunately was nowhere near accomplished as it is now. It's really one of the outstanding programs now. And we were struggling in those days. But during my second year, I had serious doubts about my commitment to to mathematics. It became clear to me that I didn't like it like the real math geeks did. I liked it, but I didn't like it. And I didn't see it as my life's work anymore. Now, for many people, that would have resulted in a nice talking session with your counselor and a change of major. For me, it resulted in an absolute shutdown. I had a semester in which I went to class 16 hours. And I passed everything. So I tried it again. It didn't work. I failed a course. Statistics. I still have funny feelings about statistics. But you do actually have to go to class to learn them. And the second one was my number theory course, my intermediate number theory course I went to. And I did go to that course some, but I didn't go when they passed out the exam. So when I went to take my exam, it turned out it had been a take-home that everybody had for 2 weeks. And I appeared with my blue book, and they all handed it in. Fortunately, the professor was understanding and allowed me to complete it. So I went from being an honor student to academic probation in 2 years. So I was really lost, and I think that it's not that unusual for people to have a period when they're lost. And I think you need to know that, because if you have one, it doesn't mean you can't recover. It just means you're lost for now. And as I was speaking earlier today, my father used to come and have dinner with me every day, once a week. And he never talked about my troubles. He just came and had dinner with me once a week and kind of gave me a focus around which I could write myself. I went to work at the student newspaper in the Michigan Daily and found some success there and became the editorial page editor and found, if you would, that I had competencies again. I switched my major to zoology, not because I love zoology. I have a degree in zoology, and I hate if anybody ever asks me a zoology question. You know why I switched my major to zoology? All my math courses counted. So in order to change my degree from mathematics to zoology, I had 4 courses I had to take in 2 years. That's all. I had to take a genetics course, because I'd taken all the introductory science courses. I had to take a comparative anatomy course, and I had to take some ecology course, which wasn't very popular in those days, but probably more popular now. So I have a degree in zoology. And then I wanted to buy a car. This was the summer after my junior year in college. I'd ride it myself. I was going to class like a real person, showing some success at it, but still lost because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was down. And my brother, I was going to work the summer as the editorial page editor at the Michigan Daily. And that paid $400, which doesn't seem like a lot of money now, but it was $400 a month was a lot of money in those days. And my brother said, hey, there's a health scholarship minority program this summer that's paying $400 a month. And the editorial page, if you've never worked on a morning newspaper, it doesn't go to work until 5 o'clock because you have to wait till something happens to comment about it. And so I could work in the daytime in the health scholarship program that summer and then work at night at the editorial page office, buy a car, which only cost $1,900 in those days. And so for that, a career in medicine was born. I went to work at RFUMS lab. He was a geneticist and a pediatrician, and I fell in love with medicine. I just loved what he did. And I enjoyed the clinical opportunity. I got a chance to go to the genetic testing, the genetic counseling sessions. I had an opportunity to work in his lab doing cytogenetics. I could actually karyotype in those days. And he kept me on during my senior year to work in his lab. So I had a car and a calling at the end of that summer, and it was a very momentous summer for me. Now, I then wanted to go to medical school, right? But I had a small problem, right? Academic probation on your record doesn't look so good to medical school applicants. But then again, good fortune shined on me. One of the deans of the medical school read my editorials regularly. And So he thought that maybe I had a little bit of an intellectual spark. And then also I'd been on the debate team. And the fact that I'd been successful on the debate team suggested to them that despite my academic record, that maybe I could be a successful medical student. And then I did well on the MCATs, which also helps. So I did manage to get into medical school despite, I remember sitting in the movie theater watching a James Bond movie, and this was like in January of my senior year, and all at once I had a panic attack. You know, what am I going to do if I don't get in? Where am I going to go? You know, am I going to go to graduate school? What am I going to do? I didn't know what I was going to do. Fortunately, I got the thick letter and got into medical school. Now, medical school for me was fun because I hadn't been a student in a really long time. And they were all kind of tired because they'd been gunning trying to get into medical school. And I was like, boy, this is fun. And it's interesting. I mean, it was a joy. It really was a joy to be a student again. And to be a successful student is even more joyful than just being a student. So I had no trouble in medical school. It was just fun and exciting. I participated in a number of activities and, you know, rejoined the community and managed to graduate with honors. So I was happy. My most enjoyable class during those 2 years was a course called Neurobehavioral Sciences, and interdisciplinary courses, the kind that seems like you specialize in here, where we had all of the neurosciences intertwined. And so I decided early on that I wanted to be in neuroscience, but I didn't know whether I wanted to be a neurologist or a neurosurgeon. So I had a friend who knew somebody down in St. Louis who was a neurologist, a pediatric neurologist, who said, why don't you come live with me and I'll arrange for you to spend a month just kind of following them around behind him. And that's what I did for the first half of the summer after my second year. Then, you know, how things are competitive in life, and my father's friend who worked in the emergency room said, well, if you're interested in neurosurgery, you should spend time with the neurosurgeon. So he's arranged for me to preceptor with my hometown neurosurgeon for a month. And at the end of that, I thought neurosurgery was more for me. So I fell in love with neurosurgery. But then we have another problem. How am I going to get in? You know, back to the, am I going to get in? And I had, at this point, a reasonably successful academic record. And I had become a neurosurgery groupie. I was hanging around the neurosurgeons all the time, and I knew them, and I did rotation every time I could with my electives. But the chairman didn't like me at all. He made this quite clear by interviewing me 3 times, the last time of which was Christmas Eve. He made me come back from my hometown for the 3rd interview, which consisted of him telling me how many people he had washed out of his program. Well, that message, you know, I'm not good at subtle, but that one wasn't subtle. And so I ended up taking other options, and I went to Yale. Now, life is always a little complicated because I hadn't been at Yale a month when I got a call from Shelley Shue, who was chairman at University of Minnesota, offering me a position in neurosurgery. And I said, well, I'm at Yale now, and I don't know if they're going to take me or not, because in those days you didn't match for neurosurgery, you matched for internship, one of which the neurosurgeons chose, but you didn't know who. And then you were selected in October for the residency. And so I told him, could I have a little time? And he said, yes, but not much. I had originally crossed Minnesota off my list because they required 2 years of general surgery. And frankly, I hated general surgery. So I was willing to do a year, but I wasn't willing to do 2 years no matter how good their program was. So they said, no, we got rid of that. You can come just after 1 year. So then I went to see the chairman at Yale. And I said, I have an offer for a neurosurgery residency at University of Minnesota. I know that you don't usually announce your residency position until October, but could you tell me now? Because I like it here, and I'd like to know. And it's an interesting cultural, and it's really cultural, distinction. He said no. But his attitude was if I really wanted it, I would say yes. So I, of course, went to Minnesota. But later, he and I have been very good friends, and we chatted about it, and it was a matter of perception. Here I am, a black woman, wanting to be the first black woman neurosurgeon, and I have a position in my hand. And he's asking me to wait for a position that maybe Well, for me, that wasn't a hard, difficult choice. I mean, if you won't tell me yes, then I'm taking this one. Afterwards, they were all like, you should have known. You were our choice. And I'm like, how should I have known? I asked and you didn't tell me. But, you know, they wanted me to want it, and I wanted it, but I didn't want it bad enough to give up something that was for real. But what was more interesting was their approach afterwards. Their approach afterwards was, okay, you're going to go to Minnesota, but you're going to learn all your first procedures here. So I did more neurosurgical procedures as an intern than anyone ever before me. I learned how to do lumbar laminectomies, I did epidurals, I did subdurals. They wanted me to have to tell everybody I learned it. I think that was a very positive response. And so in the end, I belonged to 3 families. I belonged to the family at Yale, and those guys are still my friends. I belonged to the family in Minnesota, and then the old family at Michigan. Everybody but the chairman. Now, I then went to Minnesota, where it really is cold. And my neurosurgery residency was fun again. I was doing what I wanted. I was committed again. I had no doubts that this was the right thing. I was having a ball. I was being successful. And then, as always happens, there's a small little wrinkle at the beginning of my senior year. And what happened was, we had 2 residents a year. The resident a year ahead of me had been fired, one of them. My partner had been redirected to another specialty, and they had a manpower problem. So when the schedule came out for my senior year, I was going to be the junior resident on the university service for 6 months. So I went in to the chairman and said I wasn't going to do it. That was interestingly received. So he said, well, let's go have lunch. So he took me to lunch at the student union one Saturday. It was probably the most interesting luncheon of my life. He asked me why I felt this way. And I explained, you know, that the perception of the community, the hospital community, would be that I was somehow deficient. And I clearly wasn't deficient. And that I wasn't, as a black woman, going to send that message that I was somehow deficient by being a junior resident in my senior year. Then he said to me, well, what am I going to do when it comes time for me to sign your letter of completion? And I said, I really don't know. But I do have a copy of your letter of recommendation for my fellowship saying I was excellent. And I have read the green book for residencies that says my exposure should be progressive. And I have completed the 36 months of clinical neurosurgery that are the minimum requirement to finish a neurosurgical residency. And he said, okay. And he said, what will you do? I said, I'll go home. I've already talked to my parents. He said, I can come home and I'll finish this out. So he said, okay, next time we'll meet as resident and chairman. I said, okay, as if this had been a friendly meeting. So I went home, and I really thought a lot about it. And I decided that he had a real problem. There was no question that he had a real problem, because he didn't have enough bodies to take the rest. And I had a real problem because I wasn't willing to be perceived as inadequate. So I came up with an alternative, and I went back to him. And I said, well, what about this alternative? I'll take the night call, which is your real problem, if I can have the intern, so I don't have to work too hard. And in exchange, I can have the daytime to do neuro-ophthalmology, pediatric neurology, and neuropsychology. And so I did 3 2-month rotations on those services and did the night call. And it ultimately became actually the model for how they handled that problem for the next couple of years till the manpower problem. But it did kind of taint my experience a little bit. But I think we came to a successful resolution of that. I completed my residency and went on to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which was a delightful place to work. I don't know if any of you have ever met Louis Chute, but he is a force of nature. He's a delightful guy, and every morning he would come in and teach you about life and about the politics of neurosurgery, the politics of neurosurgical organizations, and as well as teach you about neurosurgery. So I had a delightful time there. As I finished there, I went to Henry Ford and was there really just a short while, about 8 months, because they just didn't have enough pediatrics for me. And my chairman didn't care. He said, well, you can do whatever pediatrics there is in your neurosurgery, but I really wanted to do pediatrics. So I moved to the Children's Hospital of Michigan, where I did the same number of cases that I'd done in the last year in the first month that I was there, and stayed there for all of my career. So at this point, I guess I would say to you that I can say the best thing anyone can ever say, which is I do it all again. I had really quite a lot of fun being a neurosurgeon, and I can't imagine ever doing anything else, and it certainly trumped mathematics. Questions? Okay.
Too much. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Linda Yalla, and I'm the president of the American Medical Women's Association here. And on behalf of AMWA and our campus community, we would like to thank you for such an insightful insight into your path of success. So we would like to turn to the audience now for any questions that you guys may have. Please feel free to offer them to Dr. Kennedy. And if you'd like to come up and use a microphone, you sure can, or if you can yell really loud, that would work too. So, questions?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I'm wondering if there was any difficult period during your training or as a physician where you were facing the difficult aspects of dealing with children that are in very critically ill situations and still being able to take care of them.
Most of the time, let me turn it back on. Most of the time you help them, so it feels real good. And you learn, I think, and it's a learned thing, that those that you can't help their parents. And so there's a point in which every point when you take care of a brain tumor patient, you try to take care of the tumor, and some of them you just can't fix. And then you try to manage the process. So you try to give the parents the proper expectations. You try to give them understanding about what their feelings are going to be. Like with brain tumor patients, there's often a point at which the parent may wake up one day and really want their child dead because the child is doing so badly and having so much trouble. And I tell them that because they're horrified if you don't tell them in advance. They think that they're awful people that they had this thought. So you try to tell them what's coming and what they're going to think and that it's normal. You try to work on the marriage and the fact that the mother and the father are going to react differently to the child's troubles and that they have to let that be. Because one of the problems we have in those cases is the marriages die as well. So if you can deal with those things up front, you have a better chance of saying, when the father and the mother start behaving differently, the father wants to go back to work as fast as he can, often, because he doesn't want to have to think about what's going on. And you have to prepare her for that, so that she doesn't think he doesn't care, but that's how he's trying to. Everybody has to cope however they can cope, and it's so hard that you have to let people do it however they can do it. And if you tell them that before they get there, sometimes they're more understanding. So you have a job to do, but it's a different job to do.
I'm just curious to know, you spoke about your relationship with some of your chairs for the hospitals you worked at, but what was your working relationship like with your other colleagues who were not necessarily the heads of the departments you worked at?
Well, I think it's like everybody. Some of them I liked, some of them I didn't like, and one of them is my really good friend. No, I mean, that's, like any group of people. I never had any working troubles with people. I had some fun stuff, I can tell you. I had one resident from Atlanta who was kind of a prissy guy. And he was in the sense that he was always immaculate and always under control, except when he wasn't. And we used to have fun because he was a real conservative guy. So I made it a point when I was his chief resident to let him go vote, and then go vote myself to cancel it out. So one day he got a patient transferred to him who was brain dead. They knew he was brain dead when he was transferred. There was no reason to transfer this patient. And he just lost it. I mean, he really lost it. I think he was reasonably stressed and tired, and it's of course in the middle of the night. So I'm the chief resident, so he calls me up and tells me about this patient. And I listen and listen. About halfway through, I say, and what's the question? And so he didn't come up with one. So I finally said, so let me understand this right. Somebody dumped a brain dead patient on you, and you were upset, and so you wanted to call me so that I would know that you were upset? And he hung up then. But when I came in the morning, I had flowers. So, I mean, you know, it's like a team when you're on a ward in a service. I mean, you're a team. Everybody's working together. And everybody has their personality, and you have to deal with their personality, and they have to deal with mine. But it's not that hard because you're in it together. So I never had any problems with any of my colleagues. And even Dr. Shu and I were great friends. But we had a little head-to-head, and we managed to get away without going to war, which is always desirable. Yes? I think it's fear. It's managing your fear, not their fear, your fear. I mean, things can happen that patients don't recover from. And you don't, like I was saying, in general surgery, you can cut a gut and put it back together. And maybe the complication rate's a little higher, but generally it works out. In neurosurgery, you don't always get a second chance. So there's a fear aspect that's always there. And you don't realize it until you get on an airplane and they close the door in the days before you could use your cell phone on the plane. And you know nobody can call you with any problems. That's when you realize what your chronic anxiety level is. Other questions? Yes?
I was going to ask, so you kind of touched on the downfalls of kind of doing pediatric neurosurgery. You were talking about having to deal with parents and things like that.
I don't think that's a downfall. I love it.
Okay.
You misunderstood.
Yeah, I misunderstood. Could you, like we were talking about at the luncheon, the highlights that make you really enjoy working with children?
I enjoy it because you become part of their family. Most of what pediatric neurosurgery does is quantity. So I take care of kids for years. So I know them and their uncles and their aunts and their families. And I also get to see people grow. We had a child with a Chiari malformation who had a most severe form of Chiari malformation that had inadequate breathing, so he had to go in a ventilator. And he had a party time mother. She was 17 years old and she was a party girl. There was no question that she was a party girl. So everyone was very worried about sending this child home with her. So they sent her home. And she came back about a month or two later with some pneumonia or something. And she was a different person. She was like, you nurses didn't do this, and this, and this, and this, and you didn't do this, and this, and this, and this. She had assumed the role. She was more competent than they. And it was an incredible growth experience for her. Another case was a little girl when I was in Philadelphia as a fellowship who had a craniopharyngioma and ended up with a bad combination of inadequate thirst and polydipsia. Inadequate thirst and diabetes insipidus and no thirst. So that's extremely complicated. And she had just a 18-year-old black mother, poor woman. And they were so worried that this woman, they didn't send her home for weeks because they were so worried she wouldn't be able to manage. And she managed well. She locked up everything in her house. She had locks on her refrigerator, locks on her cabinet, so she was absolutely in control of everything her daughter came. So we had a clinical research unit, and they brought her back to the clinical research unit so that we could study her a few months later. And she was in our unit for 12 hours before she was in trouble. I love those things. Mother did better than we did. So they were so convinced that she was incompetent, but she did better than we did because she was invested. So I love the parents. I don't view the parents as a problem. I view them as a resource and someone to engage in helping take care of their child. I love them. Other questions? Yes.
So, for all of us aspiring health professionals,
becoming whatever it is that we want to become.
Put a step in front of the other every day and take what comes. You can't worry about everything. You don't know what's coming. I mean, I didn't know what was going to come my way. But be prepared to deal with it. You just say, if this is what I want, and I'll deal with it as it comes, but I'm not going to worry about it. And love what you do. The best defense for anything is doing a good job. I used to tell my residents, if you do a good job, it all works out. Don't worry about the politics, just do a good job. If you do a good job, it all works out. That's what matters. And if they don't notice it, the patients notice it. And you know it. It's all about the work. The rest of it is kind of noise. Just do good work. Other questions? Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you again to Dr. Kennedy. We are grateful on behalf of your willingness to share your journey of success. On behalf of the students, faculty, and staff, we would like to present you with a token of our greatest appreciation. So thank you again.